I wish good things to you who's watching this. I am Alexey, and here's the long-awaited video on the topic of tile counting in competitive Carcassonne. If you want to win in Carcassonne, you gotta be aware, at least to some degree, of how many of each kind of tile are remaining in the deck, especially at the end of the game, when you have to make crucial decisions. So counting tiles is more important than you think, but it's also less important than you think. It all depends. More on that a little bit later. So here's what we're gonna do in this video. Before we go into how to count tiles, we will start with why you need to count tiles. So first, here's a little puzzle. In the position that you're seeing on the screen, you are playing black, and you have your last tile to play. Yellow was the starting player, so this means that they have a tile in hand which they are gonna place after your move. So pause the video and figure out what's the best move here and why. As usual, I'll give several hints first and then reveal the answer. First hint in 3, 2, 1. So first of all, we count up the points, not that it really matters, and identify that black is 4 points ahead at this moment. You can recount if you want, but just trust me. On your last move, you want to do two things. Score as many points as you can and prevent your opponent from scoring points, whichever leads to the greatest point difference. In this case, you have no meeples, so you don't have many options of getting points except for continuing your road over here, thus adding 2 extra points to your total. And this is the natural intuitive move, but of course, if this were the correct answer, this position would not have made it into the video. The truth is that in this case, you can achieve more by preventing yellow from scoring instead. For that, you need to find the best move for yellow. In order to do that, you gotta count all the tiles remaining and figure out which tile your opponent has in hand. I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds to pause the video and do that if you like. But if you're just keen to see the answer, I'm gonna reveal it in 3, 2, 1, and the remaining tile is a straight line. What is yellow going to do with a regular straight line? In all likelihood, they are going to place it in the field on the left and use their last meeple to score 6 field points, because there are 2 completed cities in the field worth 3 points each, so that makes 6. So you get 2 points for the road, and they get 6 points for the field, which is net -4. With that, yellow catches up on your 4-point lead, and the game ends in a tie. But if you use your tile to block off the field like this, then you of course get 0 points, but yellow cannot meeple this field anymore. They just can't put a straight line next to it. And they are forced to take a 3-point field over here or a 3-point road over here because they aren't any better scoring opportunities on the map. So this is net -3 points for you, which means that you still win the game by 1 point. And finding this game-winning move in this situation was entirely predicated on counting out the tiles to figure out what yellow has in hand. So tile counting matters, obviously. Here's what we're gonna do now. We'll look at some approaches you can use to count tiles quickly and accurately. We'll talk about the difference between tile counting and tile tracking. We'll then talk about how you can practice improving your speed and accuracy of tile counting without making your brain hurt, so that you can focus your mind on game decision making instead. At the end of the video, I'll talk about the extent to which you should care about tile counting depending on your level. So let's start with the classic scenario. The game end is approaching, there are 3 tiles remaining in the deck, and you want to find out exactly what they are. Most of the tiles are already on the board, and basically you need to see which ones are missing. There are 24 kinds of tiles in Carcassonne, so you kind of need to go through every type of tile and check how many of that type there are remaining. It sounds tedious because it is. That's why most Carcassonne players use grouping. several types of tiles into categories. The presence of a shield on a city tile rarely makes a crucial difference, so we can disregard that and narrow it down to 19 kinds. It's still a lot, so it makes sense to group tiles that look alike. For example, instead of thinking 4 regular monasteries and 2 monasteries with a road, I just count 6 monasteries. If they're all 6 on the table, this means we need to move on, and if only 5 are there, then we can narrow it down further and then identify which of the 2 kinds of monasteries is remaining. In a similar fashion, I like to group the big city tiles, by which I mean triple and quadruple cities, of which there are 8, triangle cities, of which there are 10, and crossroads, of which there are 8. Some players also group together all city caps, of which there are 23, but they say it works for them, but I personally don't do that. 23 is way too many, if you ask me, and it is easy to miscount, especially considering that a city splitter tile can deceptively look like 2 city cap tiles. The players who use this approach say it's easy to avoid this mistake by focusing your eyes on the center of the tile instead of the city cap element on the tile. So you can try this out and see if it works for you, but I tend to count city caps faster and more accurately when I count each kind of city cap separately. I only group together the 3 city caps with a right turn and the 3 city caps with a left turn, because these are really easy to confuse. So I count the city caps with some kind of turn to see if there are 6, and then if there are fewer than 6 on board, then I go into details to check which one is the one remaining. So this leaves us with monasteries, crossroads, triple cities, triangles, city caps with a curve, regular city caps, city splitters, if you feel like grouping the vertical and the horizontal splitter together when counting, starting tiles, straight lines, and curves. And note, by the way, how I did not mention city caps with a crossroads because they already fall into the crossroads category. This leaves us with 10 categories, each containing 10 tiles or fewer, which is really not that many if you have 2 minutes to spare. Instead of grouping by type, some players like to group tiles by purpose. So let's say if you are considering dropping a farmer here to connect to a hypothetical field, you might want to group together all tiles that suit you. In this situation, you need not a curve necessarily, but a curve-like tile. It can be either one of the 9 simple curves, one of the 8 crossroads, one of the 5 Doritos with a road, or one of the 6 city caps with a curve. This gives you a total of 28 suitable tiles, so you could just go ahead, look for similar tiles already on the board without delving into what they are exactly, and count to 28. If you see 27 or fewer such tiles on the board, then you know that you have at least 1 suitable tile remaining in the deck, and with that, at least a 50-50 shot at completing the connection. So you can try that. However, I generally don't do that because, well, 28 is a lot. And also because I try to use tile tracking instead of tile counting, which I'll talk about later in the video, so keep watching. And meeple the like button, by the way. If you made it this far, it really helps with the algorithm, and if you think of watching my competitive Carcassonne content more than once, subscribe and click the bell icon to get notifications, and this actually would help me even out with the YouTube algorithm, even more so than the like buttons. Well, anyway, back to tile counting stuff. The second point is ordering. When I need to count out the tiles on a board that already has a lot of tiles on them at the end of the game, I usually like to count from most obvious to least obvious. To me, monasteries are the most obvious, maybe because I like monasteries so much and I've talked a lot in my previous videos about the importance of monasteries, then I just see them instantly. So I first count the monasteries, then I count the crossroads, then triple cities, then triangle cities, or also known as Doritos, then tube extenders, then different kinds of city caps. Finally, I leave the road tiles, which is straight lines or curves, until the very end, as they are the hardest to count for me, just because there's so many of them. If you have a fixed order in which way you count tiles, then you are less likely to forget a certain type of tile. But a more advanced approach is tile tracking. Instead of pausing late in the game to count up every single one of the 60+ tiles that are on the board, especially if you are in time trouble, you could keep track of tiles as they're drawn throughout the game. As soon as a tile of certain kind is drawn, make a little mental note. Oh, now comes the second triple city, or oh, now comes the 7th curve, and especially, oh, now comes the 8th and the last crossroads, like especially when the tile is the last of its kind. If it sounds tedious to you, you could apply this approach partially. I've had many games where once I've reached a position with just a few tiles remaining, I know exactly what the tiles are, or what the remaining tiles are, without having to count at all, because I had thought about these tiles before. For example, if you need a curve to complete a field connection, and at some point in the game you identify that, say, there are 2 curves remaining, and you decide it's enough, so you drop a farmer. After that, if a curve is drawn at any later point in the game, you feel something. It's either, yes, I got the tile I needed, or, oh no, my opponent got one of the tiles that I needed. The chance of me completing the connection just dropped from 75% to 50%. But then, if a curve is not drawn, you forget the whole curve situation for a while and focus on different aspects of the game, maybe on a different side of the board. And then suddenly, you reach a time when there are only a couple of tiles remaining in the deck. Do you need to count to figure out what they are? No. If you don't remember feeling anything about a curve being drawn, well, the 2 remaining curves you had to count earlier are still in the deck. And this kind of situation occurs in games way more often than you might think. All you gotta do is learn to make that leap of faith and trust thy earlier self that you had counted the curves correctly in the first place. Tile tracking can be fruitful in the early game too. Let's look at this position. You are playing yellow and you just drew this tile. What's unusual about it? That's right, it's the last of its kind, and this should impact your game strategy a lot. First, now blocking has become much easier, so you should be more careful when starting new cities, and conversely be more willing to spend moves on blocking your opponent's city meeples. And when you reach the endgame, you won't need to count this type of tile again, because it changed your strategy so much early on that it's just impossible to forget. Tile tracking, or at least partial tile tracking, works well when you need the same tile for different purposes. Imagine you draw a curve and you have 1 meeple left. And now you are thinking, should you start a 4-point ring road with your last meeple? So you count the remaining curves and notice that, let's say, there are only 2 of them left, and you decide that starting a ring road is not worth it, because you could end up with 0 meeples for a long time, or even for the rest of the game. And then later in the game, you are facing a decision whether or not to attempt a connection to a big field. But then you remember, oh, back then when I was thinking whether to start a ring road, there were 2 curves remaining, and no curves have been drawn ever since, so there still must be 2 curves remaining, so the field connection is still live, and this means that you don't need to count again. So once you apply this approach a bunch of times, you start noticing that tile counting doesn't seem so hard anymore, well, because it just doesn't involve any further counting. Before we move on to the segment, let me know in the comments if there are any tile counting approaches that I missed, or if there are any that you use and you find fruitful yourself. I'm most curious to find out what you think. But let's talk now about practicing tile counting skills. You can practice them in a variety of ways. The obvious one is by playing. Tip number 1. play slower time controls so that you have the time to count accurately. Accuracy over speed. As you get more experience, you can start playing faster time controls and focus on the speed of your counting. Tip number 2, play opponents who are similar in strength to you. Then you will have more close games, which will incentivize you to count tiles. Because when you're winning plus 50 or losing minus 50, the game situation is either too good or too hopeless for tile counting to even matter, so you don't get any practice. Tip number 3, solve puzzles from my videos. They typically involve tile counting, among other things. If you've solved all of them and you can't get enough of them, I'm planning to make some more, of course, but you can also create puzzles artificially. Here's what I often do. Actually, let's do it together now. So, you can go to Board Game Arena and look at whoever is the top player right now, or one of the top players. Just make sure that it is somebody who plays classical Carcassonne. Then you go to their game history. The game history. Okay, they play too many other games, so you gotta filter it. So you gotta filter it by Carcassonne. Perfect. And then it doesn't matter what the game is. So that was an arena game apparently. So you go there and you view game replay. We don't need the whole game. We just need the very end of the game. So I like to go to move number 125. So on Board Game Arena, the way moves are counted, placing a meeple also counts as a move. So depending on the number of meeples placed, each game will have a roughly different number of moves, but move number 125 should be close enough to the end of the game, but also not the very end of the game. Okay, so 7 tiles remaining. We're just gonna skip through. Wait, who was the... So 7 tiles remaining. Yeah, okay, let's just... Well, it doesn't matter exactly what these moves are. You'll see what I mean in just a second. So there's... Okay, 3 tiles remaining, then 2 tiles remaining for reds. She places over here. Okay, 1 tile remaining. And now we're going to see the crucial one. So 1 tile remaining, which means that we're going to have 1 more move. So we do this. And now it's a simple situation. So imagine that you're red over here. You need to find the optimal move for you, and in order to do that, you need to find out what the last tile of green is. So luckily it doesn't show here, but green has a tile in hand because green started. So, I mean, I guess because here neither of the opponents has meeples, probably it won't matter that much. But anyway, we're not doing game practice here. We're just doing counting practice. So I'm going to just right now try to figure out how many, so what is the remaining tile. And then let's see how long it takes me. Okay, so all 6 monasteries are right here, so it's not that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All crossroads are there. Triple cities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All are there. Now triangles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All are there. What was next? Extenders, 1, 2, 3, they are all there. Now, different types of city caps. Let's start with city caps with the turns. So we have 1, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over here, so it's not it. City splitter is 1, 2. Vertical city splitter is 1, 2. Where's the third one? I can't see the third one. Oh, so I guess it must be it, right? Do you see a third one? I don't. The one is here. One is over here. I'm just going to double check that I'm not hallucinating. I usually like to go in rows. Oh, in columns. Some players like to go in rows. And yeah, so we double checked it carefully, so which means that the remaining tile is a horizontal or vertical, well, depending on how you call it, how you turn it, city splitter. So that's pretty much it. And we don't even need to bother counting the other city caps, although we could, but let's just not spend too much time. So this means that, well, it pretty much doesn't really matter what we make as a move. Oh, no, 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 no. It's, oh no, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Because green will not be able to score any points. So we might as well just, I don't know, add one more point to our field, to our road down there, and call it a day. So let's see if we were correct. Yep, and exactly, green had a vertical city splitter. So I don't know how long it took us. It seemed that it was less than a minute. And then you could start with exercises like these. And then, so we did this with 1 tile remaining, right? But you could do this with 2 tile remaining, 3 tiles remaining, 4 tiles remaining, 5 tiles remaining. And well, depending on how much further you want to take this practice. Tip number 4. This one's gotta be controversial. Practice playing with a tile counter. I know, don't click away, my dear Catalans and Romanians. These are examples of countries whose top players absolutely despise tile counters, and I understand them. But let me explain this. So at first, this could seem counterintuitive. How will you learn to keep track of tiles if the software does half of the job for you? You know, you kind of, like, you draw a tile, you click on it, and you can probably see that it reduces the count until it's left with 0. And then at the end, you sort of know exactly what the tiles are. And this is true, but a tile counter can teach you something else. By seeing all the available tiles all the time, you learn to recognize when to prioritize tile counting and in which situation tile counting is and isn't important. Understanding when to even bother tile counting is probably more important than tile counting itself. I used to play low-stakes games with a tile counter quite a bit at some point. Don't worry, not against any of my viewers or anything. I haven't opened the tile counter in over a year now, and I still find the experience of having tried a tile counter most valuable. I feel like I wouldn't have as deep of an understanding of certain game situations had I not had this experience. Now, of course, the ethics of tile counters can be a bit problematic. First, tile counters like this, or tile counting scripts where you don't even have to click, and even paper notes are classified as outside help and thus are forbidden in most official competitions, and you gotta respect that. A tile counter doesn't give you a huge advantage, and I have won many games in a row against opponents known to use tile counters or even tile counting scripts without any significant difficulty, but it does save a lot of time, so it is still an unfair advantage over your opponent, especially in fast time controls. So ideally you use it in a practice game against somebody who you know is also using a tile counter, and definitely not in a tournament game, because, well, rules are rules and I don't think I need to explain this. But if you really don't like this approach at all, then at least you can use a tile counter just for post-game analysis. Or you can even use a script. There's a beautiful script made just for that purpose by David from Carcassonne, Spain. You may have seen it. I have used it on stream before for game analysis, and the link to that will be also in the description. Just please be advised that it only works with a Chrome browser, as far as I'm aware. And for the final part of the video, how much should you specifically care about counting tiles? So it's gonna sound weird after I've made this half-hour or whatever video about tile counting, but don't overestimate the importance of tile counting. Tile counting should inform your game decisions, not replace them. If you are a beginner or an intermediate player, then just a little tile counting at the right moment will go a long way and will give you way better results than obsessing over each tile. First, use rough counts. For example, if you are starting a rhombus-shaped city like this, just glance at the board and see if it looks like there are many triangles on it. If the answer is no, this means that many triangles are still in the deck, which means that you are likely to finish your city soon. If, on the other hand, the board looks like it's covered in nothing but triangles, it means that few triangles, if any at all, are remaining in the deck. So it's probably wiser to save that meeple of yours for another day. Second, do double-check the precise tile count, but only in crucial moments and only for certain types of tiles. I often see intermediate players making a move in the hope of a tile that exists in principle but is no longer available in the deck. You don't want to make that kind of mistake. And this is not that hard to double-check. You want to connect to a field like this? Well, make sure that there's at least one curve left. You only need to count to 9. I'm sure you can do that. If you are an advanced player, add endgame tile counting to the above. In a close game, you probably want to spend some time figuring out exactly the last 3 or 4 tiles, just so that you can calculate the optimal final scenario that gives you the best chance at winning the game. Here's a further tip. When there are just a couple of tiles remaining in the game, focus on tiles that are left in the deck, not on the ones that aren't there. This is a way to prevent miscounts. I've often witnessed the following situation. In a casual game, I'm playing against an opponent with whom we chat, and there are 2 tiles remaining. My opponent makes a move, and then the final tile comes out, and it's a curve, and they say, "Oh, I miscounted, I thought there were no curves remaining." If you recognize yourself, well, first, I understand, mistakes do happen, and I have also miscounted more than once while on stream in front of hundreds of viewers. However, my question to you is, okay, so you thought it wasn't a curve, but what did you think was the remaining tile instead? Had you gone all the way and tried to identify the exact remaining tile instead of just loosely defining it as something that's not a curve, you would have probably noticed your mistake and recounted correctly. Finally, at the top level, where you gotta fight extra hard to squeeze out these extra 2% of equity or win probability, in other words, any extra piece of information you can get is an advantage. So yeah, you kinda gotta keep track of the tile counts pretty much all the time to get the best results. In the endgame, you needed to calculate the final scenario to find that crazy 12% field connection if you are desperately behind, or to close off that crazy opportunity for your opponent if you are massively ahead. And in the middle game, you needed to plan for the future. You gotta be thinking not, where do I put this tile that I drew right now, but you gotta plan multiple moves ahead. Okay, if I get this tile, then I place it here. If I get that tile, then I place it over there. And awareness of remaining tiles allows for a productive long-term game plan and helps you see your possible paths to victory. In any case, as you improve your overall game level and rack in those new enjoyable wins or instructive losses, your tile counting skills improve with experience anyway. I hope you learned something. If you did, I will unobtrusively remind you again about the like button and the channel subscription and the importance thereof for the YouTube algorithm and helping popularize competitive Carcassonne around the globe and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you soon.